The smell of cigarette smoke and cheap whiskey clung to the underground den like a second skin. Around the table, men with hollow eyes and fistfuls of cash laughed at the kind of jokes that only made sense when your conscience had already clocked out. Raymond Campbell was not laughing. His hands trembled as he reached into the breast pocket of his wrinkled shirt, not for money, because there was none left but for a photograph. A worn, folded photograph of a young woman in a diner uniform. Her natural curls pinned back from her face, her eyes tired but still kind. He slid it across the green, felt like it was nothing, like she was nothing. Across the table, the loan shark leaned forward. The single gold tooth at the corner of his smile caught the overhead bulb and glinted like a warning. He picked up the photograph with 2 fingers, studied it, then looked at Raymond with the flat, patient eyes of a man who had collected many things that used to belong to other people. "Deal," he said. Raymond didn't flinch. He just reached for his glass. Across town, Gena Campbell was pulling a double shift. Her feet had stopped hurting somewhere around hour 9, when the body runs out of complaints and just goes quiet. She moved between tables on muscle memory alone, refilling coffees she couldn't afford to drink herself, smiling at customers who barely looked up. The hem of her beige hoodie peeked out from beneath her apron. Her voluminous curls were barely contained in a puff at the back of her head, and her deep brown skin held the faint shimmer of someone who had been sweating under fluorescent lights for far too long. She was beautiful the way only exhausted, determined women are the kind of beautiful that nobody in that diner bothered to notice. She had made rent, barely. She had enough left to keep the lights on for 2 more weeks. She told herself that was enough. She told herself things were turning around. She believed it, the way she always believed it, because what was the alternative? She walked home through the cold. Snow had started to fall in thin, scattered flakes, catching the neon glow of the casino sign on the corner red and blue light, bleeding across the wet pavement like a bruise. She didn't look at the casino. She never did. She turned onto her street. She noticed the door immediately. It was open. Wrong. The frame was splintered around the lock, and a slice of yellow light cut across the dark hallway like a blade. Gena stopped walking. Every instinct, her body had went silent and then screamed at the exact same time. She should have run. She didn't run. She thought of her father. She went inside. They were waiting for her, 2 of them, big men in dark jackets who filled the small apartment the way furniture fills a room, leaving no space to breathe. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. One of them held up a piece of paper with a number on it, and the number was so large that Gena's vision blurred at the edges. The other one was already moving toward her. "Your father's debt," the first one said simply. "You're the payment." She fought. Of course she fought. She kicked. She clawed. She screamed into a street that wasn't listening. But they were twice her size and had done this before, and within moments she was outside in the snow, her arms locked behind her back, being dragged toward a van idling at the curb. The cold hit her face like a slap. The adrenaline hit like ice water, overriding every aching muscle and hour of exhaustion. Her body, which had been running on empty, suddenly wasn't. The casino sign blazed behind her, indifferent and bright. And then the van didn't move, because 3 black SUVs had appeared from nowhere, arranged in a silent, deliberate arc across the road. Their headlights were off. Their engines barely made a sound, and from the middle vehicle, a door opened. He stepped out slowly, the way powerful men always do, as though the world had already agreed to wait for him. He was tall, dressed in a long, dark overcoat that fell to his knees, his sharp, angular features unreadable in the cold night air. His monolid eyes swept the scene once the van, the goons, Gena, and settled. In one black-gloved hand, extended without ceremony, was a stack of cash so thick it barely fit in his grip. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Principal. Interest. Every cent. The man's gaze moved from the money to the men holding Gena, then, briefly, just briefly, to Gena herself. "The girl is mine now. Take the money and tell your employer the account is settled." Somewhere across town, In that underground den with its smell of smoke and whiskey, her father reached for another drink without looking up. To Raymond Campbell, Gena was a losing hand he had already folded. To Gang Tae, she was something else entirely, something he had been waiting, very patiently, to collect. If you're hooked on Gena and Gang Tae's impossible story, smash that subscribe button and ring the bell because the next chapter is going to be insane. Comment below, Team Gena or Team Trust Nobody? Don't miss what happens next. Their love is about to face its deadliest test yet. See you in the next chapter. Gang Tae, one of his men said quietly from behind him, a tone that suggested confirmation rather than introduction. There was a long silence. The snow fell between them all like punctuation. One of the men had a fresh cut above his eyebrow from the struggle inside the apartment, she assumed. The man with the bleeding eyebrow picked up the cash. He looked at his partner. Some wordless calculation passed between them, and then they got back in the van. The door slid shut. The engine revved, and the van reversed slowly up the street and turned the corner and was gone. Gena stood in the snow and didn't move. She was shaking from cold, from adrenaline, from the particular full-body aftermath of terror that has nowhere left to go. She looked at the man in the overcoat. He was already turning back toward his vehicle. "Wait." Her voice came out wrong, too thin, too desperate. She steadied it. "Who are you? What do you mean mine? I'm not. You can't just—" He paused without turning around. "Get in the car, Miss Campbell. I don't know you." "You knew them." He turned then, just enough to look at her over his shoulder, the scar through his eyebrow, the eyes that didn't blink. "Which would you prefer?" She looked back at the empty street where the van had been. She looked at the broken door of her apartment building. She thought about her father, who had her photograph in his breast pocket tonight and had used it as a chip. She looked at the man in the overcoat. She got in the car. She didn't sleep. She sat in the back of the SUV with her hands folded in her lap and her jaw set, and she watched the city give way to something different. First the downtown lights thinning out, then the neighborhoods changing. The streets getting wider, the buildings fewer and further between, until they reached a private road behind a gate that opened without anyone touching it. The estate beyond it was not what she expected. She had been picturing something dark, something that matched the men in the van, the underground den, the smell of the life she'd been yanked into. Instead, the building that appeared at the end of the private drive was modern and severe and almost brutally elegant, all clean lines and floor-to-ceiling glass, pale stone and dark steel, surrounded by manicured grounds that disappeared into the dark. The kind of place that didn't look like it had ever seen disorder. Inside was worse. Or better. She couldn't decide. The interior was vast and minimalist, all high ceilings and muted tones, white walls, dark wood floors, furniture in charcoal and black, and the occasional deep green that felt like it had been chosen by someone with very specific taste and no interest in warmth. Everything was precise. Everything was expensive. Everything was exactly where it was supposed to be, which made Gena feel immediately and acutely aware that she was the only thing in this building that was not. A woman appeared from a doorway 50s, iron gray hair pulled back, an expression that gave away absolutely nothing, and led Gena up a staircase without a word to a bedroom that was larger than her entire apartment. White bedding, blackout curtains, a bathroom with a walk-in shower and small glass bottles of things that probably cost more than her monthly rent. The woman set a folded set of clothes on the bed, plain, but clean, and pointed at the bathroom. "Mr. Gang Tae will see you in the morning," she said. Then she left. Gena sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the wall for a long time. She was still in her diner apron. She was still cold from the snow. Outside the window, the grounds were dark and still, and somewhere far off she could see the glow of the city she had just left and would not be returning to tonight. She thought about her father. She thought about that photograph. She thought about the look on the loan shark's man's face when the cash hit the hood of the van. The girl is mine now. She lay back on the bed, fully clothed, and stared at the ceiling, and told herself she would not cry. She kept that promise until approximately 3 in the morning, and then she stopped keeping it for about 20 minutes, and then she washed her face, changed into the clothes that had been left for her, and sat in the chair by the window and waited for morning like it owed her something. Morning came whether she was ready for it or not. She came downstairs just after 8, still wearing the clean clothes from the night before. Gang Tae was already at the dining table when she came downstairs. He was in a different suit than the night before charcoal, impeccably fitted, the top button of his dark shirt open in a way that somehow read as deliberate rather than casual. He had a cup of black coffee and a document in front of him, and he didn't look up immediately, which told her something about the kind of man he was. He finished reading the line he was on. Then he set the document down. "Sit," he said. She sat, because standing in a doorway would have been performative and she was too tired for performance. The iron-haired woman appeared with coffee and a plate of food that Gena had not asked for, but whose smell made her realize she had not eaten since noon the day before. She ate. She was not going to be dignified and hungry at the same time. Gang Tae watched her the way you watch something you've been thinking about for a while. Not unkind, not warm, somewhere between the two, and more unsettling for it. "You have questions," he said. "About 1,000. I'll answer some of them." He turned the coffee cup once in his hand. "Your father's debt was significant. He had borrowed across several accounts over 3 years. Your name was listed as secondary collateral on 2 of them without your knowledge. The total, with penalties, was enough to make you a viable asset to people who think in those terms." A pause. "I don't think in those terms." "You literally just said the girl is mine," Gena said. Something shifted in his expression, not quite amusement, but adjacent to it, gone before she could be sure it had been there at all. "I said what I needed to say to people who respond to that kind of language." He set the cup down. "What I'm saying to you now is different. You are not a prisoner here. You are not going to be harmed. But I also cannot let you walk back out that gate, because the men who came for you last night answer to someone with a longer memory than a cleared debt. And until that situation is resolved, you are safer here than anywhere else you could go." Gena looked at him for a long moment. "So I'm a prisoner who isn't a prisoner. You're a guest with a temporary travel restriction. That's not better." "No," he agreed. "It isn't." He pulled a single sheet of paper from beneath his document and slid it across the table. It was a contract, plain language, no legal obfuscation, the kind of document written by someone who wanted it to be read and understood. She picked it up. "You'll work in this house. Personal assistant, some organizational work, some household management, whatever is required. Your presence here will be explained to my associates as a business arrangement, which is what it is. In return, your safety is guaranteed. The debt your father accumulated is not your responsibility, and it will not be treated as such." He paused. "When the threat has passed, you're free to go. No residual obligation." Gena read the contract twice. She turned it over to check the back. She looked up at him. "Why? Why what?" "Why any of this? You don't know me. You paid off a debt that wasn't yours to pay, and brought me to a house that looks like it costs more per square foot than my neighborhood does per block. And you're offering me a clean contract and breakfast." She put the paper down. "People don't do that. Especially not people who show up in 3 black SUVs at midnight." Gang Tae looked at her for a moment before he answered, and in that moment his expression did something complicated, something that moved through it and was controlled before it arrived anywhere readable. "Sign the contract, Miss Campbell," he said quietly. "You can keep asking questions while you work." She picked up the pen he had placed beside the paper. She signed it. She told herself it was because she had no other viable option, which was true, but it was not the whole truth, and she knew it. The mansion had a rhythm, and Gena learned it the way she learned everything by paying attention. The iron-haired woman's name was Mrs. Yoon, and she ran the household with the quiet, immovable authority of someone who had been doing it for decades and had no interest in being thanked for it. There was a small staff, a cook, 2 men who seemed to exist primarily near doorways, A driver she rarely saw, and they moved through the house in the same way the furniture did, purposefully and without waste. Nobody asked Gena personal questions. Nobody was unkind. Nobody explained anything they didn't have to explain. Gangtae left early and returned late. When he was in the house, he was usually in his study or on calls in a language she didn't speak, and he moved through the rooms with the same quality she had noticed outside in the snow, a controlled, deliberate stillness that made space around him. He was not what she had expected a mafia boss to be, which she supposed was the point. Her duties were light at first, organizing correspondence, managing schedules, the kind of administrative work that required precision but not much imagination. She was good at it. She had always been good at numbers, at patterns, at finding the logic hiding in the mess, which was perhaps why it only took her 10 days to notice the discrepancy. She had been going through a set of quarterly ledgers that Mrs. Yoon had left on her desk with the instruction to sort and cross-reference for Mr. Gangtae's review. They were dense documents, columns of figures that looked, at first glance, like perfectly ordered rows. But Gena had grown up in an apartment where the difference between eating and not eating came down to whether her father had gotten to the electricity bill before the casino did, and she had developed, out of necessity, a near-perfect instinct for the moment when numbers stopped adding up. She found it on page 47 of the third ledger, a vendor account that had been running a recurring overpayment for 22 months, small enough per transaction that it wouldn't flag in a standard review, but compounding across time, and across 3 subsidiary accounts into a figure that, when she wrote it down on a separate sheet of paper and checked it 4 times, made her sit back in her chair and stare at the ceiling for a solid minute. She wrote it up. She checked it again. She cross-referenced it against the previous year's ledger, which confirmed it. She stapled the pages together, wrote a single, clear summary at the top, not hedging, not qualifying, just the figure and the source and the solution, and she walked down the hall to Gangtae's study and knocked. He looked up from his desk. He had his jacket off for the first time she had seen, sleeves rolled to the elbow, and she noticed the edge of ink below his left collar that confirmed what the open button had suggested, the dragon tattoo beginning its climb up his chest. His hands, folded on the desk as he looked at her, were exactly what she had noticed that first night, caroused. A working man's hands in a CEO's office. She put the stapled papers on his desk. There's a vendor account in the third quarter ledger that's been running an overpayment for almost 2 years. She pointed to the summary line. That's what it's cost you. I've identified the source and written out what you need to do to recover the overpaid amount and close the gap going forward. He looked at the paper. He looked at her. He looked at the paper again, and this time he picked it up, and his eyes moved down the page with the focused attention of someone who understood what they were reading. He turned to the second page, then the third. The room was very quiet. You found this in the standard ledgers, he said finally. Yes. Mrs. Yoon's review process has been the same for 4 years. I know. It's not a criticism of her process. The overpayment was structured to look like a normal fee variance. It takes a specific kind of eye for it. She paused. I have that kind of eye. Gangtae set the papers down. He looked at her again, and this time the look was different from any look he had given her before. Not the cold assessment of the first morning, not the guarded patience of their working days. This was something quieter and more direct, the look of someone recalibrating. Sit down, he said. She sat. Where did you learn this? Watching my father lose money my whole life. You learn the patterns. She said it without bitterness, or tried to. I took 2 accounting courses at community college before I had to drop out to cover rent. The rest is just paying attention. He was quiet for a moment. The vendor account. The recovery process you outlined, you're confident in it? I double-checked it 4 times. Check it a 5th time, and have Mrs. Yoon bring me the documentation tomorrow morning. He paused. And Miss Campbell. She was already standing to leave. Yes, this is good work. He said it the way he said most things, without decoration, without the social warmth that would have made it easier to receive. Just the plain fact of it. offered cleanly. Thank you. She walked back down the hall and sat at her desk and looked at the city through the study window for a while. The feeling in her chest was strange and unfamiliar, and it took her a moment to identify it, because it had been so long since anyone had looked at something she had done and said simply, without any angle or agenda, that it was good. She had been at the mansion for 3 weeks when the gala happened. She hadn't known about it until 2 days before, when Mrs. Yoon appeared at her desk with the expression of someone delivering information they had been specifically asked to deliver, and no further, and told her that Mr. Gangtae would require her presence at a formal event on Saturday evening, and that arrangements would be made. Gena had asked what kind of event. Mrs. Yoon had said, the kind that requires a dress, and then left. The dress arrived the next morning. It came in a white box, with a single black ribbon, carried by a woman Gena had never seen before, who said only that she was there to ensure the fit was correct, and who opened the box with the brisk efficiency of someone who dealt daily in beautiful things and had long since stopped being impressed by them. Gena had not stopped being impressed. She wasn't sure she was capable of it. The gown was emerald silk, deep and true and saturated, the color of something growing in the dark, rich enough to make everything else in the room look slightly apologetic by comparison. It was cut to fall from the shoulders to the floor in one clean line, backless, the silk moving the way water moves, with an authority that came from the quality of the fabric and not from decoration. There was no beading, no embellishment, just the color and the cut, which was more than enough. She put it on in her room while the seamstress made the small adjustments and didn't speak, and she looked at herself in the full-length mirror and felt something shift in her chest that she couldn't entirely name. It wasn't the dress, or not only the dress. It was the woman in the mirror who was wearing it, her deep brown skin luminous against the emerald, her natural curls released from the puff she'd worn every day, and falling around her face in the way they did when she didn't try to contain them. She looked like someone who had decided to stop apologizing for taking up space. She had left her old clothes on the chair in the corner, the faded denim jacket, the waitress uniform she had worn home that night, and somehow hadn't given back. When the seamstress left, Gena picked them up and held them for a moment. They smelled like the diner, coffee, and fryer oil, and the particular fatigue of a double shift. They smelled like the life she had been living when all of this happened. She folded them carefully and put them in the bin, not because she was ashamed of where she had come from, but because she was done carrying around proof of how little she had been valued. Gangtae was waiting in the foyer when she came downstairs. He had his jacket on, charcoal tonight over a black shirt, the faint glint of a watch at his wrist that she did not have a reference for the price of but suspected was significant. He was looking at his phone when she reached the bottom of the stairs. He looked up. For a moment he didn't say anything. He took her in the way he took in everything fully, without rushing, without performance, and something passed through his expression that was gone before she could hold it still enough to read it. But it had been there. "The diamond studs," he said. A small box appeared from his jacket pocket. He held it out. "Wear them tonight. They'll complete the look." She opened the box, small, brilliant, set in white gold, catching the foyer light like they were specifically designed to do exactly that. She looked at him. "This is a lot for a business event. You'll be meeting people tonight who read value in the details," he said. "I need them to read the right things." She put them in. She looked at him in the mirror by the door. "And what is it that you need them to read?" He met her eyes in the reflection. That expression again controlled, close, almost something. "That you belong here," he said simply. The car was waiting. The city was lit and cold beyond the gate, and somewhere out there, her father was still sitting at a table somewhere, still reaching into his pocket for something to trade. But that was out there, and she was in here, and tonight she was wearing emerald silk and diamonds, and a look in her eyes that was new, that was hers, that no one had put there but herself. She got in the car. She held her chin level. She did not look back. The gala was held in a glass and steel tower downtown, 40 floors up, the city spread below it like something offered. Men in dark suits and women in extraordinary clothes moved through the rooms with the specific ease of people who had never once had to choose between two necessary things and could not have imagined doing so. Gena had been in rooms like this exactly 0 times in her life, and she had expected to feel it the weight of not belonging, the particular self-consciousness of a woman who had been a waitress 3 weeks ago, now standing in the middle of old money and older power. She didn't feel it. Or she felt it for approximately the first 8 minutes, and then her brain, which was excellent at pattern recognition and adaptation, began doing what it always did, watching, cataloging, understanding the room. She understood, for instance, that the man in the navy suit near the bar was nervous, because he kept touching his cufflinks, which were unnecessary in a room where everyone already knew his name. She understood that the woman laughing too loudly near the window was performing for an audience of one, the silver-haired man across the room who was carefully not looking at her. She understood the architecture of the room's power, the way it moved and pooled around certain people, and she understood, gradually, that it moved and pooled around Gang Tai, the way water finds the lowest point naturally, completely, without anyone visibly directing it. He moved through the room without working to. People came to him. Conversation opened and closed around him with the rhythm of something choreographed, and he was unfailingly precise, a word here, a reference there. A look that said, "I know more than I'm choosing to say," and that everyone seemed to find both intimidating and deeply compelling. He kept Gena close. Not possessively, he didn't take her arm, didn't perform anything, but she was always within a few feet of him. And when he introduced her, he did it with a brevity that implied she was exactly where she was supposed to be and required no further explanation. The name she drew responses, not confusion recognition, which told her that her presence here tonight had been deliberately prepared for, which told her that Gang Tae had been planning this for longer than 2 days. She filed that information quietly, the way she filed everything. Late in the evening, when the crowd had thinned, and the city below had deepened to a full dark, she found herself standing at the floor-to-ceiling window with a glass of sparkling water, looking out. She heard him come to stand beside her before she saw him that quality of space he carried. "You handled yourself well tonight," he said. "I watched you do it first." A pause. "You noticed the pattern. I always notice the pattern." He was quiet for a moment, and in the reflection of the glass she could see both of them, the emerald silk and the charcoal suit, the city behind them like an audience. "The man you spoke to near the East Corridor," he said. "What did you make of him? He owes someone money and he's hoping you don't know who." She took a sip of water. "He mentioned the shipping district twice without being asked about it. That's usually either deflection or an invitation." Silence. Then, in the glass, something that might, if she was reading it correctly, have been the beginning of a smile. "You are," Gang Tae said quietly. "Not what I expected." She looked at his reflection. "Good." The city glittered below them, indifferent and electric. She thought about the diner. She thought about the cold street and the snow and the van, and the moment she had believed no one was coming. She thought about a photograph being pushed across green felt. And she thought about the fact that she was standing here now, 40 floors up, in a dress that cost more than 3 months of her old rent, with diamond studs in her ears and a brain full of patterns that a man who controlled half this city had just admitted he hadn't seen coming. She was not a pawn anymore. She didn't know yet what she was becoming, but she could feel the shape of it, something stronger, something sharper, something that the woman she had been 3 weeks ago would not have recognized but would, she thought, have hoped for. The night stretched on below. The contract on his desk said she was free to leave when the threat had passed. She was beginning to think she might not want to. The phone was not supposed to exist. Gang Tae had been clear about that in the first week her old number was compromised, her old phone a liability, and a new one had been provided that was clean and routed through channels she didn't ask about and didn't want to know. The old SIM had been removed and stored, though Mrs. Yoon had mentioned it would remain active for transition purposes, a phrase Gena hadn't questioned at the time. So when her original number rang on a Tuesday evening forwarded to her new device, a number only 3 people in the world still had, and 2 of them were former diner coworkers she hadn't spoken to in a month. She felt the specific cold that comes not from temperature but from recognition. She was in the small sitting room off the east corridor, the one with the good reading light and the view of the grounds, going through a set of correspondence that needed sorting before morning. The phone was in her hand before she decided to pick it up. The number was one she knew. She answered. "Gena." His voice was rough, rougher than usual, which was saying something, because Raymond Campbell's voice had been weathered by cigarettes and bad decisions for as long as she could remember. "Baby girl, I need you to listen to me." She didn't say anything. The sitting room was very quiet. Outside, the grounds were dark, the security lights cutting pale gold rectangles across the manicured lawn. "I know you're angry," he said. "I know what you think I did. But I need you to understand I didn't have a choice, Gena. I was in over my head and they were going to... Dad." Her voice was flat, not angry. Flat in a way that was worse than angry because it had nothing underneath it. "What do you want?" A breath, ragged. "I'm in trouble. Real trouble. The loan shark his people found me. They've had me for 2 days. And they're saying that because the debt got transferred to someone else, the deal changed. They're saying they're going to..." His voice broke, and she hated herself for the way her chest tightened in response. "Gena, they're going to kill me. Tonight, unless someone comes. Call the police." "I can't call the police." The old edge came back for a moment, the edge she had grown up navigating, the irritation of a man who considered common sense an insult. Then it softened again into something that sounded like desperation, and she couldn't tell anymore which version was real. "Please. You're in that house. You know where the back gate is. You know the keypad. I just need you to open it so I can get in. I just need to get inside those walls and they can't touch me. 15 minutes, Gena. That's all I'm asking." She was quiet for a long time, long enough that he said her name twice more, his voice getting smaller and older with each repetition, and she thought about the photograph, the green felt table, the gold tooth and the word deal. She thought about everything she knew, everything she had filed and cross-referenced and understood over the past weeks. She thought about the way patterns worked, the way numbers told the truth even when people didn't. She thought about her mother, who had died when Gena was 9, and about the way her father had stood at the grave and wept and held her hand, and about the fact that she had spent the 20 years since then trying to find that man again in the one who kept sitting down at tables and losing. "Where are you?" she asked. "South side, near the old rail yard. They've got me in a car. I think I can slip out in the next hour if you can just..." "I'll see what I can do," she said. And then, because some part of her brain was still working even when her heart was not, "Don't call this number again." She hung up. She sat in the quiet room for a long time. The correspondence on the table in front of her blurred slightly and then refocused. She thought about telling Gang Tae. She turned that thought over in her mind and looked at it from every angle, the logic of it, the safety of it, the rational and obvious necessity of it. And then she thought about her father's voice cracking on the line, and the 20 years of trying, and the grave and the held hand. She told herself it would take 5 minutes. She told herself she would let him in, call Gang Tae immediately, and he would be safe. She told herself she knew her father. She told herself she knew what she was doing. She was wrong about all of it. The back gate was accessible from a side corridor that ran parallel to the east wing. The keypad was a 6-digit code she had been given in the second week as part of her household access for deliveries and staff movement. It was 11:40 at night. Mrs. Yoon had retired at 10. The 2 men who existed primarily near doorways were, as far as she knew, stationed at the front of the property. She moved through the corridor quickly and without lights, which she told herself was so she wouldn't wake anyone. She found the gate in the dark by memory-heavy steel, set into the stone wall, the keypad glowing faint green at its side. She stood in front of it for a moment. The grounds beyond were dark. The city hummed distantly behind the wall. She didn't know that the security system was designed with redundancy, that opening the back gate without the proper authorization sequence would trigger a silent alert, but only if the front perimeter remained secure. She didn't know that the men waiting in the dark had already cut the front gate's external sensors, turning her small breach into the key that would disable the entire system's response protocol. She entered the code. The lock disengaged with a sound like a decision. She pushed the gate open 6 inches. Dad? Nothing. The dark beyond the gate was still and cold, the thin smell of exhaust on the air. She pushed it wider. Dad, I'm here. Come quickly, we need to. They came through the gate before she finished the sentence. Not one man. Not her father. 4 men in dark clothing moving with the speed and organization of people who had been waiting for exactly this precise moment, this precise width of open gate, and she had given it to them. She stumbled back and opened her mouth, and the shout that came out of her was less a word than a sound, raw and full-throated. Before a hand covered it, and she was shoved hard to the side, and the men were past her and moving into the corridor, and she heard the crash of something ahead, heard voices, heard the particular crack of something she recognized, even though she had never heard it outside of a television, as the sound of a body going hard into a wall. She got up. Her elbow was bleeding where she had hit the stone floor. She ran. The corridor was chaos in a way that was somehow more terrifying for being controlled. These were not panicked men. They were working, moving through the east wing with purpose, and a knowledge of the layout that she registered distantly as deeply wrong, that someone had given them the layout, that this had been planned down to the gate code and the corridor and the timing. She reached the main hall and saw Gang Tae. He had come from the direction of his study still dressed, which meant he had still been working, which meant he had been 30 feet away when she had opened the gate and he was not losing. But there were 3 of them and he was managing rather than overwhelming, and she could see from the way he moved that his left side was compromised, that something had already happened before she arrived. There was blood at his temple. His jaw was set in a way that she had come to recognize as the outermost expression of pain in a man who did not permit himself to show pain, and it was the look on his face controlled, contained, and under it something that had nothing to do with physical hurt, that broke something open in her chest. He was trying to get to her. Even now, bleeding and outnumbered, his movement had a direction, and the direction was toward her. Gang Tae. The blow came from behind her. Not hard enough to knock her out, but hard enough to drop her to her knees, and in the moment that her vision strobed and her ears rang, she was grabbed from both sides and lifted, and she heard Gang Tae's voice say her name, not Miss Campbell, not the formal distance he had maintained for weeks, just her name, stripped of everything. And then she was being moved, and the front door was open and the cold air hit her and she was outside. The van was at the front of the property. She did not understand how there was a van at the front of the property. And then she understood, because the gate at the front was also open, and she understood the full architecture of what had just happened. The back gate a distraction, the front gate, the real entry point. Her father's call designed not to get him inside, but to get her to open one entrance while they breached another. And she had opened the door and handed them the whole house. She fought. Of course she fought. She had not stopped fighting since the first night, and she was not going to stop now. She connected with someone's jaw with the back of her head, felt a grip loosen, drove her heel down onto an instep, and for one moment she was almost free, and then the van door was open, and she was inside it, and the door slid shut behind her. She was on the floor of the van, hands bound with a zip tie, the vehicle already moving. She pushed herself upright against the side wall. The interior was dim, lit only by the bleed of streetlights through the blacked-out windows. She was not alone in the van. There were 2 men in the front, and 1 in the back with her, and there was someone else. Her father was sitting on the bench along the van's left wall. He was not bound. He was not bleeding. He was not afraid. He was counting money. The bills were spread across his lap, and his fingers moved through them with the automatic, practiced ease of a man who had handled cash this way 1,000 times before. Not the frantic counting of someone checking if they'd been shorted, but the satisfied settled counting of someone receiving what they were owed. He hadn't looked up when she came in. He looked up now. And the expression on his face was not guilt. It was not shame. It was the specific, flattened neutrality of a man who has made a decision and gotten past the hard part and is simply waiting for it to be over. "I'm sorry, baby girl," he said. He went back to counting. She had always known. She understood that now, sitting on the floor of the van with her hands bound and her elbow bleeding and the city moving past the blacked-out windows. She had always known, somewhere beneath the hope and the loyalty and the 20 years of trying, that the man her father had been at her mother's graveside was not a man he was hiding but a man he had lost, and that no amount of her effort or her sacrifice or her belief was ever going to recover him. She had known it, and she had refused to know it, because knowing it meant accepting that she had been paying a debt that was never going to clear. The tears came and she let them. Not many. Not for long. She watched her father count his money in the dark, and she let the last version of him she had been carrying, the grieving man at the graveside, the one who had held her hand, she let that man go. When she was done, her jaw was set, and her eyes were dry, and she was thinking. She was always thinking. They kept her in the van for what she estimated was 40 minutes, then transferred her to a building near the water. She catalogued everything, the smell of salt and diesel, the sound of ships moving in the near distance, the particular echo of a large metal space, a warehouse or a dock structure. Her hands were still zip-tied. She had been given a folded jacket to sit on, which she registered as, "Strange you did not make a ransom asset comfortable unless you planned to return her." They planned to use her. They were going to put her in front of Gang Tae and offer a trade, and whatever they wanted in exchange for her was the real objective. She was still a chip. The game had just changed tables. She spent the hours before dawn conducting a quiet and thorough inventory of everything she had and everything she knew. She had the knowledge she had accumulated over 5 weeks in Gang Tae's world, the names, the accounts, the patterns. The illegal ledger she had spent 3 evenings quietly memorizing, because information had always been the only currency she could reliably accumulate. She had the hidden knife. The knife was Mrs. Yoon's. Or had been a small folding blade the older woman kept in the kitchen for reasons she had never explained, which had gone missing from the counter drawer nearly a week after the gala. During a moment when Gena's instincts, tuned over a lifetime of uncertainty, had told her quietly and without specific reason to be prepared. It was taped to the inside of her left forearm, beneath her sleeve. The zip tie was on her wrists. The knife was above the zip tie. The geometry of this was workable. She waited. She thought about Gang Tae arriving at the docks wounded, and the thought made her chest do something complicated and urgent that she set aside for later. She thought about the contract on his desk, the clean, simple language of it, the fact that a man in his position had taken the time to write something she could read and understand without a lawyer. She thought about "You are not what I expected," said quietly in a glass tower with the city below. She thought about the way he had said her name in the hallway, just her name, nothing else when they were taking her. She thought about what she was going to do when the moment came, and she made her plan, and she did not allow herself the luxury of imagining that it might not work. The docks were everything the rest of this story had been: cold, dark, wet, and arranged entirely for maximum threat. The warehouse doors were open to the water, rain coming in sideways off the harbor, the dock lights making everything the color of old photographs. Shipping containers stacked like brutalist architecture along the far wall. The smell of brine and rust, and something industrial she couldn't name. They walked her out to the center of the dock at a few minutes past 3 in the morning. The loan shark was there. She recognized him from the description she had assembled across weeks of careful listening. A compact man in an expensive coat, who moved with the specific energy of someone who believed in his own invulnerability, and had never yet been given concrete reason to reconsider. He had a gold tooth. He stood with 5 men arranged around him, and he looked at her the way her father had looked at the photograph, like a value to be calculated. "Right on time," he said to no one in particular. And then, from the far end of the dock, headlights appeared. One vehicle. He had come in one vehicle, which told her everything about what kind of man he was and nothing reassuring about whether he was still standing. The SUV stopped at the dock entrance. The door opened. Gang Tae walked out. He was wounded. She had known he would be, but knowing and seeing were different things, and the sight of him, his coat dark with something that was not rain along the left side, his movement carrying the particular cost of someone overriding significant pain on pure will, made the thing in her chest clench hard. But he was walking. He was walking with his jaw set and his eyes forward, and the same quality of deliberate stillness that had characterized him from the first moment, as though pain were simply another factor to be managed, and he had already managed it. He stopped 20 feet away. He looked at Gena first, one long, direct look that traveled over her the same way it had in the foyer the night of the gala, complete and assessing, checking for damage. She met his eyes and kept her chin level to communicate. "I'm intact. I'm thinking. I have a plan." She did not know if he received any of that. She hoped he did. He looked at the loan shark. "She walks to me first," he said. "Then we negotiate." "That is absolutely not how this works." The loan shark smiled, the gold-tooth smile. "You walk away from your organization. You sign the transfer documents. Every account, every operation, everything under the Gang Tae name moves to me. Then she walks to you. Then you both get to leave." The smile. "Isn't that generous? Those documents don't hold without witnesses who'll live long enough to enforce them. I have lawyers. You have criminals in suits. There's a distinction." She was listening to the exchange, and she was also, with the careful micro-movements of someone who has spent the last 3 hours planning this, working the small folding knife free of the tape on her forearm. The guard to her left was watching the negotiation. The guard to her right had shifted his weight twice in the last 2 minutes, which meant he was cold or anxious or both, which meant his attention was not fully on her. The knife was in her palm now, folded, not yet open. She waited. Gang Tae was still talking. He was good at it, precise and unhurried even now, even bleeding. And she understood that he was buying her time, and she understood that he knew she needed it, and she understood, with a clarity that arrived like something obvious in retrospect, that he had looked at her across 20 feet of dock and understood exactly what she had been communicating. She had one shot at this. The zip tie needed one clean cut from the right angle. Then she needed to move fast enough that the 2 men immediately flanking her did not catch her before she could put enough distance between herself and the group to make grabbing her costly. Beyond that, she needed the distraction to hold, and for the plan she had made in the dark of the warehouse to work, she needed one more thing. She had memorized the loan shark's illegal ledger over 3 evenings because information was the only currency she could reliably accumulate. She had also, on the 4th evening, used the household laptop during a window of access she had not been authorized for, but had not been specifically denied, to prepare a structured, documented, anonymous tip to a specific department of the Organized Crime Division. A tip that included account numbers, transaction records, and the location of 3 separate warehouses that the ledger had described in terms she had understood, and a law enforcement analyst would understand clearly. She had kept it ready, unsent, waiting for the moment it would matter most. When her father's call came, she had sent it immediately after hanging up, with a delivery delay of 4 hours, enough time for her to act, but not so long that the window would close. It was 3:12. The tip would reach the Organized Crime Division in 8 minutes. She opened the knife. The sound was sirens, first distant, then rapidly less distant, the particular layered wail of multiple vehicles converging on a location. The loan shark heard it at the same time she cut the zip tie, and the next 3 seconds were the kind that exist outside of normal time, compressed, total, every sense running at maximum. She was moving before the tie hit the dock floor, driving her elbow back into the ribs of the guard to her left, and going low and fast to the right. And the guard on her right was already turning toward the sound of the sirens, and she cleared the gap between herself and the nearest shipping container in the time it took the dock to erupt into noise, shouting, the crack of something she didn't look at, the loan shark's voice rising to something that was not the composed gold tooth register anymore, but something raw and ugly underneath it. Gangtae moved. She saw it from behind the container, saw the controlled, lethal efficiency of a man who had been waiting for exactly this window, who had been standing 20 feet away, wounded and negotiating while she worked, and had known, or trusted, or both, that she would create this moment. He moved through the confusion with the precision of someone who had stopped calculating and was simply executing, and the men around the loan shark, who had been organized and confident 30 seconds ago, were now divided between the sounds coming from the dock entrance and the one man in the center of them who was no longer standing still. She did not watch all of it. She moved to the outer edge of the dock and she looked for her father, because there was one more thing she had to do. He was near the far wall. She had seen him when they walked her in, positioned slightly behind the loan shark's group, to the side. A man at the edge of a scene he had arranged but did not want to be centered in. He was moving now, trying to find the exit in the chaos, his head down, his coat collar up, the instinct of a man who had spent a lifetime knowing when to disappear. She stepped in front of him. He stopped. He looked at her, and she looked at him, and the dock was noise and movement around them, and none of it touched this moment which existed in its own terrible quiet. He was older than she had noticed lately. The light here was harsh and had no mercy, and it showed her the full accounting of 20 years and 1,000 bad decisions written into the lines of his face. He looked afraid. Not of her, he looked afraid the way people look when they are finally being seen for exactly what they are, and the seeing is its own exposure. "Gena," he started. "Don't," she said. She reached into her pocket and held up her phone. On the screen was a message, a confirmation, time-stamped, of the tip she had sent to the Organized Crime Division. His name was in it. Not as a peripheral figure, as a named informant who had been actively cooperating with a rival syndicate and had facilitated the use of a civilian, his daughter, as a strategic asset in an attempted assassination. She had built the file carefully over 2 weeks because she was good with numbers and she was good with patterns, and she was, it turned out, very good at building a case. "The police have everything," she said. "Your deal with the syndicate, the money, both times you sold me." She looked at him for a long moment, not with anger, not anymore, but with the clear, unobstructed vision of someone who has finally taken off a pair of glasses that were never the right prescription. "I'm not deciding your fate, Dad. I'm just not carrying it anymore." Somewhere behind her, she heard footsteps, rapid, official, the sound of people arriving with authority, the dock entrance filled with light. She turned her back on Raymond Campbell. She walked away. The aftermath was the kind of controlled chaos that Gangtae apparently navigated the way she navigated ledgers, with a systematic, unhurried competence that suggested he had emergency protocols for emergencies, and the protocols worked. His people had arrived in the wake of the police, which she later understood was, by design, you sent the police first when you wanted the scene documented, and your own people second when you wanted the elements the police didn't need to see properly managed. The loan shark was in custody. The syndicate's dock operation was compromised beyond recovery. 3 of Gangtae's people had minor injuries. His own wound was 2 cracked ribs and a deep laceration along his left side that a compact, unimpressed man she did not know treated at the scene with the efficiency of long practice. She sat on the hood of one of the SUVs and watched all of it happen, and felt the adrenaline drain out of her the way water drains slowly at first, and then all at once, leaving a profound and strange quiet in its place. The rain had lightened to a mist. The harbor was gray, and beginning to show the first faint suggestion of a dawn somewhere beyond the clouds. Gangtae came to stand beside her when the scene had resolved itself enough to leave. He had his coat back on over the treated wound, and he was moving with the careful economy of someone managing pain by minimizing unnecessary motion. He stood beside her and looked at the dock, and neither of them said anything for a moment. "The police tip," he said finally. "That was yours." "Yes, you built that file from the household materials. And from memory." "I have a good memory." He was quiet. "You could have told me." You would have taken it over. She looked at him. It needed to come from me. The whole thing needed to come from me. He considered that. He did not argue with it, which she was coming to understand was how he expressed agreement about things he found it complicated to agree with. Your father, he said. In custody. She looked back at the dock. I gave them everything. He won't be able to trade his way out of it this time. She paused. I'm done. He looked at her then, and the look was the fullest version of every look he had given her, all of them at once. The first cold assessment, and the quiet recalibration over the ledger, and the thing that had moved through his face in the foyer with the emerald dress and the stripped down just her name in the hallway. All of it present and none of it controlled away this time. He was tired, she realized. Not physically or not only. He was tired in the way she was tired. In the way people get when they have been managing everything alone for a very long time. Come home, he said. It was the first time he had called it that. She noticed. She thought he noticed that she noticed. They got in the car. The mansion was quiet when they returned, the grounds still dark in the last hour before dawn. Mrs. Yoon appeared anyway. She had clearly not slept, would clearly not admit this, and had clearly already assessed the situation from the expression on their faces and the state of Gang Tae's coat, and had determined that tea was the correct response. She produced it without comment and disappeared again, which was, Gena thought, exactly the right thing to do. They sat in the main room, not the formal dining room, not the study, but the sitting room off the east corridor with the good reading light, which Gena had quietly claimed as hers over the past weeks, and which Gang Tae had, without comment, stopped using for anything else. He lowered himself into the chair with the visible cost of the ribs, and she watched him do it without offering to help, because she understood already that he would not want the help offered. But she put the tea within reach and he took it without acknowledging the gesture, which meant he acknowledged it. He reached into the inside pocket of his coat. He put a piece of paper on the table between them. She recognized it immediately, the contract she had signed on the second morning, the clean, simple language, her signature at the bottom in the handwriting of a woman who had been exhausted and frightened, and trying very hard not to show either. He had carried it, she realized, in his coat. He had been carrying it at the docks. He held it over the candle on the table, a real candle, one of the few warm things in this room of precise and controlled beauty, and he held it there until it caught. He set the burning paper in the ceramic tray on the table, and they both watched it go. The terms are satisfied, he said. Everything this contract stipulated, your safety, your work, the resolution of the threat against you, complete. He looked at her. You're free to go, Miss Campbell. Tonight or in the morning, whenever you choose. A car will take you wherever you want, and you'll have what you need to rebuild without starting from zero. The paper was ash now. The room was very quiet. Through the window, the sky was beginning its first pale shift toward morning, the darkness softening at its edges into something that was not yet light but was the intention of it. Gena looked at the ash in the tray. She looked at the man across from her, the scar through his left eyebrow, the hands that were calloused like a soldier's, the exhaustion that was showing through for the first time, because he was too tired and too hurt to fully contain it. She thought about the pattern she had been building in her mind for 5 weeks, the one that wasn't a ledger and wasn't a contract and didn't have a formula. She thought about the way he had arrived at the docks bleeding, alone, in one vehicle, for her. She thought about "You are not what I expected," and about the way he had said her name. She stood up. She crossed the room. She stopped in front of him, and he looked up at her with those careful, dark eyes that were not quite guarded anymore. Not right now. Not at 4 a.m. after everything. And she leaned down and she kissed him. Not tentatively. Not with apology or qualification. With the same directness she brought to everything she had decided, clean and clear and entirely her own choosing. He went very still for exactly 1 second. And then he kissed her back, with a restrained and careful thoroughness that told her this was not a surprise to him, even if its timing was, that he had been building this same pattern from his side of the room for weeks, that a man who planned everything had perhaps been waiting to see if she would be the one to decide this. She pulled back. She looked at him. "I'm not going," she said. Something crossed his face that was not quite a smile, but was the warmest thing she had ever seen from him, quiet and unguarded and real. The kind of expression a person makes when something they had been very carefully not hoping for happens anyway. He reached up and tucked one of her loose curls back from her face with a hand that, despite its calluses, was careful. "Stay," he said. "Not an order, not a negotiation, just the one word, plain and open. I just said I was." "I know." A pause. "I wanted to say it anyway." Outside, the city was beginning to come back to life in its quiet, pre-dawn way. The first delivery trucks, the first birds, the first suggestion of a world that kept moving regardless of what happened in the dark. The harbor would be busy by morning. The police reports would need to be managed. There would be 1,000 things to address and organize and strategize, and she would be here for all of it, not because a contract said so, but because she had looked at the pattern and understood what it meant. She sat down beside him, not across from him, close enough that his shoulder was against hers, and she picked up her tea and looked out the window at the lightening sky. The ash of the contract had cooled in the tray. The debt was gone. The cage was open. She was here because she had chosen to be, and it was the first choice she had made in a very long time that had no calculation underneath it, no survival arithmetic, no angle, just what she wanted. That, she decided, was what freedom actually felt like. Can Gangtae tell the difference between a woman who chose him and a woman who was sent to destroy him? And what happens when the man who controls the entire city's underground realizes the most dangerous person in his world has been sitting across from him at breakfast every morning? Smash that subscribe button and ring the bell because you do not want to miss what comes next. This story is about to get so much darker. Drop a comment below. Do you think Gena and Gangtae's love can survive what's coming? Or did she just walk back into the most elaborate trap of her life? Like this video if you are completely obsessed with this slow burn romance that keeps raising the stakes. The next chapter drops soon, and trust me, you are not ready for what Gena finds hidden inside that mansion. See you in the next one, if she makes it out alive.